The cassette tape appeared on my doorstep on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. No envelope, no note, just a weathered black cassette with a handwritten label that read Brinmore Twins, 1978. I might have thrown it away, dismissed it as some student prank had it not been for the name Brinmore. That small Welsh mining town had haunted the periphery of my academic research for years. I'm Dr. Elellanar Winters, professor of linguistics at Cardiff University, specializing in rare language patterns and extinct Celtic dialects. But in academic circles, I'm perhaps better known for my controversial papers on xenoglossy, the alleged phenomenon of speaking languages one has never learned. Most of my colleagues consider it pseudoscience. I consider it an unexplained frontier. The tape sat on my desk for 3 days before curiosity got the better of me. When I finally played it, the recording began with static, followed by a man's voice, trembling slightly. "This is Dr. Alan Morris, child psychologist, Brinmore Regional Hospital. Subject interview, June 12, 1978. Present are myself and the Morgan twins, Ellie and Evan, age 8. A pause then. Children, can you tell me your names?" What followed was a sound that made the hair on my arms stand on end. 2 children's voices perfectly synchronized, speaking what I could only describe as something other than language as we understand it. Guttural clicks interspersed with melodic tones that rose and fell like ocean waves. Consonants that seemed to fold in on themselves. Vowels that lingered too long to be natural. I replayed the tape 7 times that night. By morning, I had booked a train to Brinmore. The Wales I traveled through was a patchwork of green valleys and abandoned mining towns. Places where industry had come and gone, leaving behind shells of communities. Brinmore was no exception, a town clinging to the hillside, its terrace. Houses standing in neat rows like gravestones. The rain was relentless, as if the sky itself was weeping for something lost. The local library was housed in what had once been the town hall, a Victorian building with high ceilings and the musty smell of forgotten knowledge. The librarian, Mrs. Powell, a woman in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, regarded me with suspicion when I inquired about the Morgan twins. "Why would you be asking about them, then?" Her Welsh accent thickened with her apparent discomfort. I explained my research, my position at the university, careful to frame my inquiry as academic interest in unusual linguistic patterns. "I'm studying cases of children who developed unique communication systems," I said, deliberately vague. Mrs. Powell's face remained impassive, but her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through index cards. "We don't have much on that. Best you speak with Dr. Harris at the community center. He's been here since before the incident." The word incident hung in the air between us. "What incident would that be?" I asked. Mrs. Powell's eyes darted to the window where rain streaked down the glass like tears. "The disappearance, of course. Terrible business. The whole town felt it. Still does." Dr. William Harris was a retired general practitioner who now spent his days organizing community health initiatives in a converted chapel that served as Brinmore's community center. He was tall and gaunt, with deeply lined features that spoke of decades witnessing human suffering. "The Morgan twins," he said after I'd introduced myself and my research. "Now there's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in quite some time." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Dr. Winters. This may take a while." According to Dr. Harris, Ellie and Evan Morgan appeared in Brinmore in January 1978, brought by social services after being found wandering along the A465 highway during a snowstorm. They were discovered by a lorry driver who nearly hit them as they stood, hand in hand, in the middle of the road, wearing nothing but thin night clothes, seemingly impervious to the freezing conditions. "The strange thing," Dr. Harris said, lowering his voice, though we were alone in his office, was that they showed no signs of hypothermia, not even shivering. The driver said their skin was warm to the touch, as if they just stepped out of a hot bath. The twins had no identification, no belongings, and most peculiarly, no apparent way to communicate in any recognized language. Initial assessments suggested they were approximately 8 years old, physically healthy, with no signs of abuse or neglect. They were placed temporarily in Brinmore Children's Home, while authorities attempted to locate their family. I examined them the day after they were found. Dr. Harris continued. Physically, they were unremarkable. Perhaps a bit small for their age, with that distinctive pale blonde hair that almost looked white under certain lights. But their eyes, he paused, his gaze drifting to the window. Their eyes were what everyone remembered, so dark they appeared. Black with an intensity that was unsettling in children so young. The twins' most notable feature, however, was their language, or rather what people initially assumed to be a twin language, a private communication system sometimes developed by twins in early childhood. But as linguists and child psychologists evaluated them, it became clear that whatever they were speaking was far more complex than typical cryptophagia. It had structure, grammar, consistent phonological patterns, Dr. Harris explained. Dr. Morris, from the regional hospital, became quite obsessed with documenting it. He made recordings, transcriptions, spent hours with them every day. Dr. Alan Morris, I asked, remembering the voice on my mysterious cassette. Dr. Harris's expression darkened. Yes, poor man. He was never the same after. After what? After they disappeared. None of us were. He sighed heavily. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For 6 months, the Morgan twins lived at Brinmore Children's Home, a Victorian building that had once been a workhouse, perched on the hill overlooking the town. They attended the local primary school, but remained isolated from other children, partly due to their inability to communicate, partly due to the other children's fear of them. Children can be cruel, but there was something more than typical bullying at play, Dr. Harris explained. The other children seemed genuinely afraid. They claimed the twins could make things happen. Strange things. What kind of things? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, academic. Dr. Harris hesitated. I'm a man of science, Dr. Winters. I don't put stock in superstition. But there were incidents. A boy who teased them developed an inexplicable rash that spread across his body within hours. A girl who excluded them from a game fell down the stairs the next day, breaking both arms. The school's pet rabbit was found dead after the teacher separated the twins for misbehavior. He shook his head. Coincidences, of course, but in a small town like this, coincidences begin to feel like patterns. As winter gave way to spring, the town's unease grew. The twins remained unclaimed, their origins a mystery. No missing persons reports matched their description. No one came forward with information. It was as if they had appeared from nowhere, or as some locals began to whisper, from somewhere else entirely. Superstitious nonsense, Dr. Harris said firmly, but in a former mining community, old beliefs die hard. There were rumors of changelings of fairy children. Ridiculous, of course. Yet, even as he dismissed the folklore, his eyes betrayed his discomfort. I wondered what he wasn't telling me. What happened to Dr. Morris's research? I asked, changing tack. His recordings, his notes. Most of it was lost in the fire, Dr. Harris replied. Fire, at the hospital a week after the twins disappeared. The psychiatric wing where Dr. Morris kept his office burned to the ground. Official reports cited faulty wiring, but he trailed off. But you're not convinced. Dr. Harris met my gaze directly. Dr. Morris had become obsessive about the twins. He claimed to be making breakthroughs in understanding their language, said it had patterns that connected to ancient Welsh, but also to something older. He was speaking with a professor from Aberystwyth, a specialist in prelatic linguistics. He paused. The night before the fire, he called me, sounding panicked. Said he'd found something in the twins' speech patterns that changed everything. He wanted to meet to show me his findings. And did you? We arranged to meet the next morning. He never showed. When I went to the hospital to find him, the East Wing was already engulfed in flames. Dr. Harris's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. They found his body in his office. The official report said he was overcome by smoke inhalation while trying to save his research. The air in the room felt suddenly heavy, charged with the weight of buried secrets. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. And the twins? I asked quietly. When exactly did they disappear? The same night as the fire. The night watchman at the children's home checked on them at midnight. They were asleep in their beds by morning. They were gone. No signs of forced entry. No indications they'd packed or prepared to leave. Their beds were made, night clothes folded neatly on their pillows. Was there a search? The most extensive in the town's history. Police, volunteers, dogs. They searched the mountains, the old mine shafts, the reservoirs. Nothing. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. He leaned forward. There was one thing, though. Something the official reports don't mention. I waited, hardly breathing. The night they disappeared, every dog in Brinmore howled from sunset to sunrise. And at the children's home, they found markings. Markings on the wall above their beds. Symbols etched into the plaster, not carved or painted. It was as if they'd been burned into the wall. Symbols no one recognized except he hesitated, except Dr. Morris had drawn similar symbols in his notes, said they represented phonemes in the twins' language. The revelation sent a chill through me. Do you have photographs of these markings? Dr. Harris shook his head. The children's home was demolished in the early 8th South as best concerns officially, though some say the real reason was that strange things kept happening in the twins' former room. Children would sleepwalk there, report hearing voices. One girl claimed the twins spoke to her through the wall, told her they were waiting in the in-between. As our conversation concluded, Dr. Harris seemed relieved to have shared his knowledge, as if unburdening himself of a weight carried for decades. Before I left, he wrote down the name and address of Margaret Jones, the matron who had overseen the children's home in 1978. If anyone knows more about the twins, it's Maggie, he said. But I should warn you, she doesn't speak of them willingly, says it brings bad dreams. The rain had subsided to a gentle mist as I made my way to Bryn Terrace, where Margaret Jones lived in a small stone cottage at the end of a row of identical houses. The street had the quiet desolation of a place where most residents had either died or moved away, leaving behind only the stubborn few who couldn't imagine life elsewhere. Margaret Jones was one of those stubborn few. In her late 70s now, she had the robust build of a woman who had spent her life in physical work. Her face weathered, but her eyes sharp and assessing as she opened the door to my knock. "Dr. Winters," she said, my name sounding like an accusation in her thick Welsh accent. "Bill Harris phoned ahead. Said you'd be coming with questions about those children." She didn't invite me in immediately, instead studying my face as if searching for something. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it lacking. "I don't know what good it'll do. Digging up old miseries," she said, but stepped aside to let me enter. The cottage was immaculately kept, every surface polished, every cushion plumped. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, children, grandchildren, a life rich with connection. It stood in stark contrast to the story I had come to discuss. Overt served in delicate china cups that looked too fragile for her work-worn hands. Margaret Jones shared her memories of the Morgan twins. Her account aligned with what I'd already learned, but with the intimate details only a caregiver would notice. "They moved like one person in two bodies," she said. "Never saw twins so connected. If one got a scrape, the other would cry out in pain. They slept in the same position, ate at the same pace. Even their heartbeats synchronized. The nurse confirmed it during their checkups. And their language," I prompted. Margaret's expression tightened. "Wasn't natural that way they spoke. made the other children cry sometimes. Just hearing it made the staff uneasy, too, though we tried not to show it. She took a sip of tea. There was a rhythm to it, like music almost, but wrong somehow, like music played in a key that shouldn't exist. She described how the twins would stand by the windows at night, speaking their strange language to the darkness. How birds would gather on the sill when they did this, dozens of them, silent and watching. How plants in their room grew at extraordinary rates, twisting toward them instead of toward the sunlight. We had a cat at the home, a mouser, Margaret continued. Fearless thing had to be to keep the rodents down in that old building, but it wouldn't go near their room, would hiss and back away. Fur all stood up. She sat down her cup with a decisive clink. Animals know things we don't. I asked about the night of their disappearance, and Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. She stood and walked to the window, her back to me. I wasn't on duty that night, she said, her voice flat. My daughter was ill. I'd swapped shifts with Anne Pritchard. Could I speak with Anne? I asked. You could if she were still alive. She killed herself 6 months after the twins vanished. Hung herself in her garden shed. Left a note that just said, "They're coming back and I can't be here when they do." I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. What do you think happened to them, Mrs. Jones? She turned to face me, her expression grim. I think some questions are better left unanswered, Dr. Winters. But if you're determined to keep asking. She crossed to a cabinet, unlocked it with a key she wore around her neck, and removed a small wooden box. Anne gave me this the week before she died. Made me promise to keep it safe, but never to open it. Said if anyone ever came asking serious questions about the twins, I should pass it on and wash my hands of it. The box she placed in my hands was simple, unvarnished pine with a small brass clasp. It was surprisingly heavy. I've honored half her request, Margaret said. Kept it safe all these years. Never looked inside. Now it's your burden. She sat back down, suddenly looking every one of her years. There's something else you should know. Something I've never told anyone. I waited, the box heavy in my lap. The day before they disappeared, I found them in the garden. They were sitting in the dirt drawing those symbols of theirs with sticks, a whole circle of them. When they saw me watching, they smiled. First time I'd ever seen them smile, and said something I almost understood, in English. I asked, surprised. No, in their language, but for just a moment, it was like my mind translated it. Like I could hear past the strangeness to the meaning underneath. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her tea. They said the door opens when the stars align. Then they went back to drawing their symbols, and the moment passed. Margaret refused to say more after that, claiming fatigue. As she showed me out, she gripped my arm with surprising strength. Whatever you're looking for, I hope you don't find it, she said. Some mysteries protect us by staying mysteries. I took a room at the Red Lion, the only and still operating in Brinmore. The building dated back to the 18th century, with low ceilings and a perpetual smell of damp and wood smoke. My room was small, but clean with a window overlooking the main street. Once alone, I placed in Pritchard's box on the bed and sat looking at it for a long time. Outside, twilight deepened into night. The street lamps cast pools of yellow light that seemed to emphasize the darkness rather than dispel it. Finally, I opened the box. Inside was a small notebook, its cover stained and weathered, and a cassette tape similar to the one that had been left on my doorstep. The notebook proved to be in Pritchard's diary from January to June 1978. Most entries were mundane notes, about work schedules, grocery lists, complaints about the weather, but scattered throughout were observations about the twins. February 3, 1978. The Morgan children spoke to each other for an hour straight. Tonight, in that language of theirs. I recorded some on the tape recorder my son got me for Christmas. Playing it back gave me a headache so bad I had to lie down. There's something about the rhythm that makes my teeth ache. February 15th, 1978. Dr. Morris spent all afternoon with the twins. He's teaching them English, but they're teaching him, too. He was speaking a bit of their language when he left. Just simple phrases, he said. He looked feverish, excited, said their language has mathematical properties unlike anything in recorded linguistic history. March 20th, 1978. Found the twins sleepwalking last night. They were standing at the window, foreheads pressed against the glass, speaking in unison. When I touched Ellie's shoulder, they both turned at exactly the same moment. Their eyes were open, but didn't seem to see me. They said something that sounded like agony. Then they went back to bed as if nothing had happened. I dreamed of dark water all night. The entries continued in this vein, documenting increasingly strange behavior as spring progressed, and described how the twins began drawing their mysterious symbols everywhere, in the dirt, in condensation on windows, in their school books, how they would sometimes speak in perfect, unaccented English, but only to repeat the same phrases. The door is thin here. They're waiting for us. The stars are almost right. The final entry was dated June 20th, 1978, the night of their disappearance. They know I'm watching them. They smiled at me tonight when I checked on them before lights out. First time I've ever seen them smile. It was wrong somehow. Too wide, too many teeth. I must be imagining things. Dr. Morris called earlier, sounding strange. Said he needs to see the twins first thing tomorrow. That he's discovered something about their language that changes everything. Said it's not a language at all, but a key. I'm writing this at my station outside their room. It's midnight, and everything is quiet, except for them. They're speaking to each other in whispers, but somehow I can hear them clearly, despite the closed door. They're counting down from 100, not in English or in their usual language, but in Welsh. Old Welsh, like my grandmother would speak. When they reach one, what happens? I should check on them, but I'm afraid. God help me. I'm afraid of 2 children. The diary ended there. With trembling hands, I inserted the cassette into my portable player and pressed play. The recording began with static. Then Anne Pritchard's voice, nervous but determined. February 3rd, 1978. The twins' language, just a sample. What followed made my blood run cold. It was the same language I'd heard on my original cassette, but this recording was clearer. The twins' voices rising and falling in that unnerving synchronicity. As I listened, I began to notice patterns, repeating sounds, rhythmic structures, and beneath it all, something else. A subsonic hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones, rather than my ears. The longer I listened, the more a strange sensation crept over me. A feeling that if I just concentrated hard enough, I could understand what they were saying, that the meaning was there, hovering just beyond conscious comprehension. Then, abruptly, Anne's voice broke in, sounding panicked. They've stopped. They're looking at me. They know I'm recording. The tape cut off in a burst of static. I sat in the silent room, my heart pounding. Outside a dog began to howl, the sound long and mournful in the night air. Then another joined it, and another until it seemed the whole town echoed with their cries. Sleep eluded me that night. I spent hours reviewing my notes, comparing the two recordings, searching for patterns. By dawn, I had filled several pages with observations, but was no closer to understanding the twins' language, if language it truly was. As morning light filtered through the curtains, I made a decision. I needed to see where it had happened. The children's home, the hospital. I needed to walk the ground where the twins had lived their mysterious half-year in Brinmore. The site of the former children's home was now an empty lot overgrown with weeds and brambles. A chain-link fence surrounded it, posted with faded no trespassing signs. From the street, I could see the foundations of the old building, crumbling concrete, partially reclaimed by nature. As I stood contemplating how to get a closer look, a voice behind me said, You won't find answers there. I turned to find a man in his 60s, walking a border collie that regarded me with intelligent, weary eyes. The building's been gone 40 years, he continued. Whatever secrets it had, they're long buried. Did you know the Morgan twins? I asked directly, past the point of subtle inquiry. The man's expression shuddered. He tugged on his dog's leash. Nobody knew them. Not really. He began to walk away. Please, I called after him. I'm trying to understand what happened here. He paused, then turned back. My sister was at school with them. Said they could speak to the dead. Said they told her they weren't really children at all, just wearing children's bodies for a while. He shrugged. Kid stories most likely. But I'll tell you this. After they vanished, this town was never the same, like something vital had been taken from it. What was taken? I pressed. He considered me for a long moment. Hope, maybe, or innocence. Hard to put a name to it. He glanced at the empty lot. I worked demolition on that building in '82. Crew found things in the walls. Bird skeletons, hundreds of them sealed up in the plaster like they'd flown in and gotten trapped. And those symbols everywhere once we started tearing down the walls, burned into the wood, the pipes, even the wiring. He shuddered at the memory. Every man on that crew had nightmares for months after. Dreams of drowning, of falling through, darkness, of children calling our names from underground. Before I could ask more, he continued on his way, the dog glancing back at me once with those two knowing eyes. Brinmore Regional Hospital still stood, though the east wing destroyed. In the fire, had never been rebuilt. The remaining structure had been converted into a community health center. Its Victorian grimness, softened by modern signage and planters filled with cheerful pansies. The receptionist, a young woman who had clearly not been born when the events I was investigating took place, directed me to the hospital's small archives in the basement. For historical research, you'll want to speak with Mr. Jenkins, she said. He manages our records. Mr. Jenkins proved to be a stooped man, with thick glasses, and the pale complexion of someone who spends most of his time underground. His domain was a labyrinth of filing cabinets and shelves illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. Dr. Alan Morris, he repeated when I made my inquiry. Yes, we have some of his personnel files. The bulk of his research was lost in the fire, of course. Terrible tragedy. He led me through the maze of shelves to a filing cabinet marked Staff Records, 1970-1980, and extracted a thin folder. Not much, I'm afraid, just his employment records, performance reviews, that sort of thing. The file confirmed what I already knew. Dr. Morris had been a respected child psychologist, with a particular interest in developmental language disorders. His performance reviews were exemplary, until early 1978, when colleagues began noting concerning changes in his behavior, increasingly fixated on the Morgan case, to the detriment of his other patients. Read one note from April 1978. Recommended, mandatory leave, refused by subject. A memo from May 1978 was more explicit. Dr. Morse's theories about the Morgan twins have taken an unscientific turn. His claims about the origins of their language are inappropriate and potentially harmful to the children's treatment. Formal review scheduled. The final entry dated just 3 days before the fire was a recommendation for psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Morris appears to be suffering from delusions related to his work with the Morgan case. Today, he claimed the twins are communicating with entities through their language, which he now believes is not of human origin. Immediate intervention required. Was Dr. Morris under unusual stress? I asked Mr. Jenkins. Personal problems, perhaps. Wouldn't know about that, he replied. Before my time, but he hesitated, then lowered his voice conspiratorially. There is something else, not officially part of our records, mind you, more of a hospital curiosity. He led me deeper into the archives to a section where the shelves gave way to a bare concrete wall. The fire stopped here, he explained. running his fingers along a faint line where the concrete changed color subtly. This wall was all that kept it from spreading to the entire hospital. At first, I didn't see what he was showing me. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the dimmer light in this section, I noticed them. Faint markings on the concrete, similar to those Dr. Harris had described. Symbols that seemed to shimmer slightly when viewed from the corner of the eye. They appear to be burned into the concrete, Mr. Jenkins said. They've been analyzed, of course. No accelerant detected, no evidence of how they were made. Some say they appeared during the fire itself. I stepped closer, my heart racing. The symbols were familiar. I had seen similar marks in Pritchard's notebook, in her drawings of the twins' writing. Do you know what they mean? I asked, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. Mr. Jenkins adjusted his glasses nervously. There was a professor from Aberystwyth who came to study them in the early 80s, linguistics fellow. He claimed they resembled Proto-Celtic script, but with elements of something he called pre-human pictographs. The hospital board didn't appreciate his theories too sensational. This professor, I said urgently, do you remember his name? Davies, I think, or Davis? Welsh name anyway. Is he still at Aberystwyth with Mr. Jenkins? Shrugged. No idea. As I said, this was long before my time. Just hospital folklore now. As I photographed the symbols with my phone, a strange sensation crept over me, a feeling of being watched. I turned quickly, but there was only Mr. Jenkins regarding me with mild curiosity. You feel it too, then? He said quietly. Everyone does in this part of the archives, like someone standing just behind you. That evening, I sat in my room at the Red Lion, surrounded by my notes, recordings, and photographs. Outside, a gentle rain had begun to fall again, the drops tapping against my window like impatient fingers. The cassette player sat on the bed beside me, and Pritchard's recording queued up. I had been listening to it repeatedly, trying to discern patterns in the twins' speech. The more I listened, the more I became convinced that Dr. Morris had been right. There was a mathematical quality to it, a precision that seemed at odds with the organic development of human language. On my fifth listen, something changed. Perhaps it was fatigue. Perhaps the hypnotic effect of the repetitive sounds. But suddenly, I could almost understand what they were saying. Not the words themselves, but the intent behind them. They were calling to something, beckoning, a summoning. A chill ran through me. I stopped the tape abruptly, and in the silence that followed, I became aware of the dogs. They were howling again all across town, a chorus of animal distress that raised the hair on the back of my neck. My phone rang, startling me so badly, I nearly dropped it. The screen showed an unknown number. Dr. Winters, I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. This is Professor Emerus Davis, came a ready voice. I understand you've been asking questions about my work at Brinmore Hospital. Professor Davis, how did you small communities, Dr. Winters, word travels? Now, I suggest you stop whatever you're doing and leave Brinmore immediately. I'm researching the Morgan twins in their language, I said, ignoring his warning. I believe you may have insights. It's not a language, he interrupted sharply. That was Maurice's mistake. He treated it as communication, when it's actually incantation. The twins weren't speaking to us, or even to each other. They were speaking to what waits on the other side of the thin places. The thin places, I repeated, trying to follow his logic. Where the boundary between worlds is permeable. The old Welsh knew about them, built stone circles to protect them or contain what might come through. His voice had taken on an urgent, feverish quality. Byner sits on such a place. The mines didn't just extract coal. They weakened the boundary, and the twins knew it. Professor Davis, I'd like to meet with you, I said, trying to steer the conversation back to something concrete. To discuss your research. My research nearly destroyed me, Dr. Winters, as it destroyed Maurice, as it will destroy you if you continue. There was a pause then, but I recognized the compulsion, the need to know. So, let me tell you what I learned, and then perhaps you'll heed my warning. According to Davis, the symbols found at the hospital and the children's home were part of a system of writing that predated known human civilization. Similar symbols had been found in cave paintings dating back 30,000 years, in locations as disparate as southern France, northern Australia, and the Peruvian Andes. They're not writing as we understand it, Davis explained. They're more like coordinates, points of reference in a map that spans dimensions rather than physical space. The twins' language, he claimed, was the spoken equivalent of these symbols, a means of locating and accessing these thin places between worlds. The Morgan twins weren't human, he said baldly. Or rather, they weren't only human. They were conduits, vessels for something trying to cross over. Their disappearance wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A beginning of what? I asked. My mouth dry. I don't know, Davis admitted, and I thank whatever gods may exist for that mercy. But I do know this. Every 47 years, the stars align in a particular configuration. The same configuration that was present the night the twins vanished. And when does this alignment next occur? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Tonight, Davis said simply, which is why you need to leave Brinmore now. The line went dead. I sat frozen, the professor's words echoing in my mind. Outside, the howling of the dogs had reached a fever pitch, underscored now by the wail of wind that had begun to gust through the town. I should leave, I thought. Pack my bags and drive back to Cardiff tonight. Forget this whole mad investigation. But even as the thought formed, I knew I wouldn't. Couldn't. The mystery had its hooks in me too deeply now. Instead, I gathered my notes, the cassette player, and a flashlight. If the twins had indeed been attempting to access a thin place, there was one location in Brinmore that seemed the most likely candidate. The abandoned mineshaft on the outskirts of town, its entrance visible from my window as a darker patch. In the gathering darkness, the rain had intensified as I made my way through Brinmore's deserted streets. Shop fronts were shuttered, curtains drawn in houses. Even the Red Lion's usually lively pub was silent, closed early without explanation. It was as if the entire town had collectively decided to hide indoors on this particular night. The path to the old mine grew steeper and more treacherous as I left the town behind. My flashlight beam bounced crazily off wet stone and scrubby vegetation. The mine entrance loomed ahead, a black wound in the hillside partially covered by a rusted iron gate. As I approached, the howling of the dogs abruptly ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the rain and my own labored breathing. The gate, when I reached it, hung partially open, its padlock long since broken. Something scratched at the edges of my consciousness, a sound just below the threshold of hearing. I paused, straining to identify it. It seemed to be coming from within the mineshaft, a rhythmic pulsing that I felt more than heard, like a giant heartbeat. Logic dictated that. I turned back. Every instinct warned of danger. Yet, I found myself pushing through the gate, ducking under the low entrance of the mine. The beam of my flashlight seemed feeble in the absolute darkness beyond, barely illuminating the rusted tracks that led deeper into the earth. The pulsing grew stronger as I advanced, resolving gradually into a sound I recognized with a jolt of fear. The cadence of the twin speech from the recordings, but deeper, as if voiced by adult throats rather than children's. The tunnel began to slope downward. Water trickled along the walls, forming puddles that reflected my light in disorienting flashes. The air grew colder, damper, thick with the smell of mineral and decay. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling, giving the impression of infinite space above. The chamber appeared to be a natural cavern that the miners had broken into. its walls, smoother than the man-made tunnel, glistening with some substance that wasn't quite water. And on those walls, covering every inch of the visible surface, were the symbols, thousands of them, glowing faintly with a phosphorescence that seemed to pulse in time with the now audible chanting. In the center of the chamber stood two figures, their backs to me. They were tall, slender, with hair so pale it appeared white in the dim light. They stood hand in hand, facing a section of the wall where the symbols glowed brightest. Forming a pattern that resembled a doorway, they were, speaking in unison, their voices having the same rhythmic, otherworldly quality I had heard on the tapes, but deeper now, mature. The twins, I realized with a shock of recognition. No longer children, but adults. They had aged, yet retained that uncanny synchronicity. I must have made some sound, a gasp, perhaps, or the scuff of my shoe on stone, because they stopped chanting, and turned as one to face me. Their features were inhumanly perfect, their skin so pale it was almost translucent, but it was their eyes that held me frozen in place, black from lid to lid without whites or iris-like windows opening onto an endless void. Dr. Elellanar Winters, they said in perfect unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that sent shivers down my spine. You've been looking for us. I found myself unable to speak, my throat constricted with a primal fear, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Don't be afraid, they said, though their expressions remained impassive. You've played your part perfectly. The seeking, the questions, the connections, forming in your mind, all necessary preparations. Preparations for what? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. For opening the way, they replied. The stars are aligned. The thin place is at its thinnest, but we needed a third voice to complete the triad. A human voice freely offered. I haven't offered anything, I said, finding some courage in indignation. Their identical faces smiled. The same wrong smile Margaret Jones had described too wide, revealing too many teeth. You've been speaking our words, Dr. Winters. Every time you played those recordings, trying to understand, you were adding your energy to ours. Speaking the unspeakable, calling to what waits beyond. With horror, I realized they were right. In my obsessive listening, my attempts to discern patterns, I had begun to unconsciously mimic the sounds, mouthing them silently as the recordings played. What are you? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. We are the heralds, they said. The preparation, what comes after us, is beyond your comprehension. They turned back to the wall, where the symbol doorway now pulsed with increasing intensity. The chanting resumed, but now I could understand the words, as if a veil had been lifted from my mind. The stars are right, the door is open, the way is clear, they are coming through. A sound like tearing fabric filled the chamber, and the wall where the symbols formed a doorway began to fold inward, revealing not rock behind it, but a darkness that seemed to move and shift to have depth and substance, and something was emerging from that darkness. I didn't stay to see what. Self-preservation finally overcame my academic curiosity, and I turned and ran, stumbling back up the tunnel, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind me, the chanting rose to a crescendo, punctuated by a sound like rushing water or millions of wings beating in unison. I burst out of the mine entrance into the rain last night, not stopping until I reached my car. As I fumbled with the keys, I glanced back toward the hillside and froze. The entire mine entrance was glowing with the same phosphorescence I had seen inside, the light pulsing like a heartbeat, and rising from it into the storm sky were shapes dark against the clouds, moving in ways that defied natural physics. Not birds, not bats, but something else. Hundreds of them. Thousands, spiraling upward into the night. I drove without conscious thought, hands shaking on the wheel, not stopping until I was miles away from Brinmore. At a roadside rest area, I finally pulled over, my body trembling with reaction. What had I witnessed? What had I inadvertently helped to facilitate? In the days that followed, I monitored news reports obsessively, expecting headlines about strange occurrences in Brinmore. But there was nothing. No reports of unusual deaths, no missing persons, no unexplained phenomena. When I finally gathered the courage to return a week later, I found the town much as I had left it, quiet, somewhat run down, going about its business under perpetually gray skies. The mine entrance had been sealed with fresh concrete, a new sign warning of dangerous conditions. At the Red Lion, no one mentioned the night of the storm. When I asked about unusual events, I was met with blank stares or abrupt changes of subject. It was as if a collective amnesia had descended on Brinmore, or a collective agreement not to speak of what had happened. Dr. Harris had left town suddenly, I was told. Family emergency. Margaret Jones answered her door, but claimed not to remember our previous conversation. Her cottage was immaculate as before, but the family photographs were gone from the mantelpiece, replaced by generic landscapes. Only Mr. Jenkins at the hospital archives seemed unchanged, though he denied showing me any symbols on the basement wall. When I went to look for myself, I found the section under renovation, the concrete wall covered with fresh plasterboard. Professor Davis never answered his phone again. When I traveled to Aberystwyth University, I was informed that no one by that name had ever worked in their linguistics department. I returned to Cardiff with more questions than answers, my academic certainties shaken to their core. The recordings, both the original cassette left on my doorstep and in Pritchard's tape, had been erased, containing nothing but static, when I tried to play them again. My photographs of the symbols were similarly corrupted, showing only indecipherable blurs. All that remained were my notes and my memories, both increasingly suspect as time passed and normality reasserted itself. Yet sometimes in the space between wakefulness and sleep, I hear them again. Those voices speaking in perfect unison, calling to something beyond human comprehension. And I wonder what came through the doorway that night. What is moving among us now, unseen but present? The twins who spoke a language no one taught. They vanished together. Yes, but perhaps their disappearance was not an end, but a beginning, a herald of something that is still unfolding, still becoming. In my dreams, I see them as they were in the mine chamber. No longer children, but adults, their black eyes reflecting endless darkness, their too wide smiles revealing too many teeth, and they are counting down, not in their strange language, but in Welsh, Old Welsh, like Margaret Jones's grandmother would speak. They are counting down, and I am afraid of what happens when they reach one. Sometimes walking the streets of Cardiff, I glimpse them, two pale figures moving in perfect synchronicity through the crowd. When I try to follow, they are always gone, like mist dissipating in sunlight. And the dogs know. They fall silent when the twins are near, watching, with fearful eyes, as something not quite human walks among us. I've sealed my notes in a lead-lined box buried in my garden beneath the rose bushes. Perhaps that will be enough to contain whatever residual influence they might possess. Perhaps the symbols, even in my crude drawings, are dormant without the spoken component of the twins' language. Perhaps. But I leave this account as warning in testament. If you have heard the language of the Morgan twins, if you have seen their symbols, if you have felt the pull of their mystery, stop now. Turn away. Some doors once opened cannot be closed again, and they are still out there. Ellie and Evan Morgan, or whatever wears their semblance, still speaking their language that is not a language, but a key, still counting down. 3-2.